Anyway, let's move further. We move to Heidi Grönstrand, which is the head of the project Multilingualism in Contemporary Literature in Finland. And she's a literary scholar from Turku University, and she's been working and done a lot of research on multilingual literature in the Nordic region, and also Heidi and I and some other people have been active in creating a network called Diversity in Nordic Literature. So if anybody here is interested in research on multilingualism and diversity in the Nordic literature, there is a network for that, and they will have a seminar, or the network will have a seminar this fall. Now I can't remember when, but Heidi will tell you. And also Olli Löytty here on the first line, who is not looking up. He's one of the members of the research network. So, and there are other people. Also Sinaida Lindén, who is one of the authors in the network here, is also part of the project. But Heidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I'm so happy that we are all together here and have a possibility to discuss important issues. I'm sorry, no fancy PowerPoints and animations here, but...
Annika, maybe you can help. Just a few.
No, I can't start before.
Okay. Vi får inte upp den här PowerPoint.
Har du stängt alla första? Liksom alla andra program? Ja, man måste stänga sig alla andra.
Sorry, this is what it's supposed to be like.
Ja, det är liksom något fel program.
Okay, now it works.
Okay. Yes. This piece of news was published last week in Helsingin Sanomat, our largest newspaper in Finland. It is a detail from newspaper history. It represents a new genre, an interview published in 1892. But what is more interesting in this case and this detail of newspaper history is the topic of this interview. It is about Minna Kant's play Sylvi. The interviewer, Juhani Aho, was at that time as famous Finnish language author as Minna Kant. And they both are still very known. Juhani Aho, the interviewer, had read in a local newspaper that Minna Kant is writing at the moment her next play in Swedish. Juhani Aho decides to find out, is there a truth in this news or is it just a rumor? He visits Minna Kant and makes an interview that confirms that Kant is serious. She is going to write in Swedish for the Swedish theatre in Helsinki. And Sylvi had its premiere in January 1893. This play, Sylvi, can be described as a Finnish version of Ibsen's Dollhouse. Like Nora, also the main character in Kant's plays, is dissatisfied with her marriage. But in difference to Dollhouse, Sylvi deals with adultery. The main character falls in love with her childhood friend and decides to poison her husband. Sylvi has been relatively discussed and analyzed, for example, in context of realism and naturalism, and also the fact that Minna Kant, after having written more than 20 plays and collections of short stories in Finnish, suddenly writes a play in Swedish for the Swedish theatre here in Helsinki is known. It is a detail but is still mentioned in the literary histories. And often it it is mentioned that the Fennomans, the Finnish-speaking elite that actively fought in those times in order to improve the status of Finnish language and more largely the legal rights of Finnish-speaking people, didn't accept Kant's language choice. For the Fennomans, this sudden language change was a scandal. It was regarded as a strong signal of disloyalty for the Finnish-speaking people and party, something that Juhani Aho could foresee. Otherwise, he would hardly have made the interview in the first place. And as the subheading in Helsingin Sanomat confirms, Juhani Aho smelled news in Kuopio in summer 1892. And it is hard to think that the strong reactions from the Fennoman side were a surprise for Minna Kant either. But she didn't care about the reactions. She had been disappointed that her works were not supported by the leaders of the Fennomans who sat in the committee for the Finnish theatre, and as she was writing in Swedish, a language she had learned at school, and otherwise she knew it very well, as many people belonging to the educated class in Finland did those days. So for her, Swedish was a language of freedom. She felt that she was free from the pressures the Fennomans had caused her. Now she had wings to fly, as she writes in her letters. It is interesting that Helsingin Sanomat brought public attention to this case of Minna Kant and her play. On the other hand, it can be one way to celebrate the day of Minna Kant, that is tomorrow. And Minna Kant's day is also a day of equality in Finland, as Kant also fought for women's and poor people's rights. On the other hand, as we know, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done with regards to questions of equality, not least when it comes to questions of language. So, by highlighting the case of Sylvi from the end of 19th century, Helsingin Sanomat reminds its readers of the tensions that are embedded around literature and its languages. The article awakens the conflicts in the past and brings them to the contemporary time, to contemporary discussions. The questions the interviewer Juhani Aho poses, or should I say the accusations he makes against Kant, sound very familiar. Why has our common mother tongue have to be withdrawn in favor of the other domestic language? Why are you writing in Swedish? You must be kidding. Have you thought about the consequences? Minna Kant only laughs and just repeats herself by saying that she writes in Swedish because it amuses her and because the language is not a problem for her. And what are Juhani Aho's reactions then? He's confused, he says he cannot get across his feelings, in the end he seems to be wordless and just cites But interestingly, he continues his way to the next daughter, who according to the local newspaper also has changed the language he writes in. Both of these news, the original from 1892 and the one from last week, confirm that the language the author writes in and the language in which the text is published is definitely not and has never been only a private or personal matter. The language questions are tightly intertwined in social, political, and historical context. And here in my talk I try to continue with these themes, mostly from a Finnish point of view. somehow it feels a bit troublesome to start by referring to such an old phrase as one language, one nation, but summits the key principle of nation building in the 18th and 19th century. It feels embarrassing because, as we know, it's a phrase that doesn't only belong to the past, but is used nowadays in different kinds of extreme organizations to promote their often racist agendas. But then, on the contrary, I found it important to look more closely at the phrase and the whole nationalistic ideology that it echoes. Although in recent years, ideas of fixed entities such as nation-states as well as homogeneous national histories and national cultures have been widely challenged in various disciplines across the humanities and social sciences. Scholars have focused on different kinds of cross-border relations between nations, their histories, languages and traditions. Transnational studies or cross-border studies are terms that have been widely used to deal with the interwoven relationships between nations, cultures, individual actors. However, the interest and focus on transnational dimensions has also led to new kinds of interest towards the concepts of nation and national, and to internal and local hierarchies of power. And in my case, it has led me to look at multilingual literature in Finland in historical perspectives. Have there been other authors who have crossed the language norms than Minna Kant? And yes, there are more than one or two cases. I have also been interested in how these issues around language questions have been dealt with in literary histories, which are literary history is a genre that is also closely linked to, well, literary studies, literature, but also nation building. This phrase, one language, one nation, tell of course of the importance of language in the process of nation building. Language has been an important, if not fundamental, element of nation building. The assumption of an individual possessing one language, a mother tongue, through which he or she is organically linked to a particular ethnicity, culture and nation was deeply rooted in the idea of modern nation, not only in Finland or Scandinavia, but all over Europe. The word mother in mother tongue has strong associations with maternal and corporal origin. We could just have a quick look at some illustrations I found with help of Google and the search word mother tongue. These pictures illuminate the view of the maternal, the corporal origin of this concept. There is an affective intimacy, a natural kinship in the concept of mother tongue. In this way, the mother also stresses a static mode of belonging to the national collective, as the literary scholar Yasemin Yildiz states. although people nowadays face in their private lives, in the public, more often than before, information which emphasizes the multiplicity of mother tongues in individual's life or in the community and at the society at large. I think it's very hard to undercut those structures that emphasize the link between nation and one single language and literature. Well, we still have our national authors, national literatures, and from the beginning literature has been tightly intertwined in the nation-building processes. Yildiz, who has dealt with the concept of mother tongue in relation to literature and literature studies, says aptly, the uniqueness and organic nature of language imagined as mother tongue lends its authority to an aesthetics of originality and authenticity. In this view, a writer can become the origin of creative works only with an origin in a mother tongue, itself imagined to originate in a mother. And the result is a disavowal of the possibility of writing in non-native languages, a term she uses, or in multiple languages at the same time. As the example with Minna Kant and many others, of course, show, in practice the language or languages of authors do not follow the nationalistic ideals, which in many cases have become norms. And of course, we have also to remember the disastrous consequences of colonialist practices. It is important to move the discussion about language use and multilingualism from the individual and private sphere to a social sphere, what we do at this seminar. And it's a good example of that kind of discussion. And in this regard, the term monolingual paradigm by Yasemin Yildiz is interesting, and it has proved to be very fruitful. Instead of focusing on the term multilingualism, she has chosen to look at its opposite, monolingualism. For Yildiz, it's not only a quantitative term designating the presence of just one language. It constitutes an important structuring principle, a monolingual paradigm, which organizes individuals' life. According to this paradigm, individuals and institutions, and I would like to add also entire fields of research, etc., are imagined to possess one true language only, a mother tongue, and through this possession to be organically linked to an exclusive, clearly demarcated ethnicity, culture, and nation. And it is this paradigm that has hindered us from seeing the variety of languages in the literary field. Although we have several mother tongues, well, as we know, we don't have same kind of position, and there's not every mother tongue in a nation has such a straight link to the nation building as the main language or the dominant language. And I would like to say that during the years there has evolved a multifolded system to support this kind of system and order. When we look at Finland, it is easy to see that in spite of the fact that Finland is a bilingual country, with Finnish and Swedish as the official languages, the division of the literary and cultural field into separate literary institutions and traditions by language, defined by language, has been taking place since the end of the 19th century. when Finland became a language of administration and education along with Swedish. But even today, the literary field is organized on the grounds of these languages into separate publishing houses, literary societies, associations, unions, and partly separate literary traditions and canons too. And in this kind of system, it is not easy to find place for literatures in new languages. When looking at Finnish literary histories, it is difficult to find references to phenomena about language mixes and literature written in other languages than Finnish, Swedish or Sami. Well, for many years Sami has been included in the most literary histories. But of course, this doesn't mean that there would only have been authors who have been devoted themselves to only one language, and that language would either be Finnish or Swedish or then Sami. It's just that we don't have so much knowledge about it. It is not exaggerated to say that most time literature is approached from a monolingual angle. Fortunately, the knowledge about multilingualism on the literary field is increasing. And for example, the very newest Finnish literary history, Suomen nykykirjallisuus, contemporary Finnish literature, which focuses on a current literature written in last 2 decades, discusses not only Finnish and Swedish language literatures in Finland, but also Sami literature and also Finnish literature that has been written and published in Sweden. Moreover, it takes into account that Finnish literature is today more often than before written by an author whose background is in some other country and culture than in Finland, and whose work might be written in some other language than Finnish. But despite these kinds of positive signs, we still, of course, need to solve many problems in order to increase the visibility and appreciation of writers who write in minority or non-dominant languages. And let's see what I suggest here. And well, there are some ideas, but we should become aware of the monolingual starting points that steer the ways literature is read and conceptualized. And it doesn't mean that we should stop talking about the mother tongue. It's just that we should be aware of the connotations that is linked with it, and the power relations that has been created around it, and how it can be used to control literature phenomena and authors. It can be used as a tool of exclusion. And then translations and translators should have a more visible and valued position on the literary field and in the literary studies as well. The hierarchy between the original and translated works should be dismantled. I think that this would help the non-dominant literature to get more readers and attention of the majority. And more attention should be paid to the fact that the language borders between the dominant literatures and minority literatures are not so clear-cut that we often think that they are. The dominant literature is not necessarily monolingual. But for a long time, from a majority point of view, the language questions have not been regarded as important. Even these days, it happens that in Finland, celebrated, known work might have its origin in some other language and culture, but this aspect is not given attention to. And in this way, the monolingual paradigm is not challenged, it's strengthened, that if we just continue to look at literature in this monolingual frame. And just to conclude, I could say a couple of words of Sylvie, the play I started to talk with. It was later translated in, or soon after the Swedish version and premiere, it was translated in Finnish by the author herself, and it has been played during the years, it can be said, but only in Finnish. And it was not until 2014 the Swedish language manuscript was revisited, and director Mikko Roiha made an interesting version of it. On the stage we could hear both Swedish and Finnish. Some actors talked Finnish, some Swedish, and there were subtitles all the time. And somehow, in my interpretation, this new version of Sylvie reminds of the tensions embedded in the somehow original version of the play, but also about the tensions embedded in the language questions. But as it was played in several or two and in practice more languages, and played in not only in Finland but also in Germany and in Sweden, it also reminds that it's possible to deal with this multiplicity of languages in new, creative and constructing ways.
Thank you
very much.